Hi there, thanks for tuning in. In this segment of Container Digitalk, we wanted to get some insight from other industry professionals to find out how they're dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. We've asked Mark Moss, Global Head of Business Development for Nippon Express, to give us his insight and share some of his solutions with us. Nippon Express is a large Japanese freight forwarder with its global sales office in Singapore, where they were able to experience the very first effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's talk about mode shifting and other solutions. Hi, Mark. Thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
Very good, Alexa. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for being here with us. Hope you're keeping well despite the situation.
Yes, trying to keep as well as possible under the situation.
Oh, very good. Okay, so basically, what I'd like to ask you right now, we're going in light of the current situation with the COVID-19, is just basically a bit about your business at Nippon Express, where you are the global head of global business development.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I'd just like to get a little bit of insight into how the COVID-19 has affected your business and what you guys are currently doing and will do in future to combat the drastic effects of this virus. Okay. So I'll start off with, you're based in Singapore, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So just to position, we sort of essentially are a sales, pricing and commercial organization targeting non-Japanese global customers based in Singapore. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today will be a lot of Asia-centric, and depending what you read and who you listen to, you know, the virus really started in Asia. And I guess I'll give you a brief timeline of what's happened over the last few months. Because I think for a lot of you in Europe, and particularly and the US, this is very much a sort of quite a new thing. The last 2 weeks have been disrupted quite heavily. And for us here in Singapore, this really started back in the middle of January. So I think in some ways, Singapore was probably ahead of the curve in terms of trying to get itself prepared. But I think if you start looking at supply chain, as you know, it started happening in China. And one of the very first things that we started to do was split shift to try to get people working from home back in January in China. So that for us was a major change with close to 100 offices around China. And you know, across multi-mode. So whilst you know there's a lot of interest in ocean, of course there's complementary services and products which all help to get the containers moving, including trucking, including rail services, barge services, and of course what goes in hand with that is also air freight. Right, so all of these things have repercussions and knock-ons, but how we dealt with it, like many of our competitors, was to ensure that first of all our staff were safe, and we tried to set up safe working examples, because at the end of the day business still needed to happen, business still needed to move, and whilst Europe at the time and the US were not quite as affected, we still had to get product out for our customers. So as that started to transition really into February was really when it started to hit the world stage quite extensively, and we first started then doing our first sort of I'd say isolation sort of programs. And again, we really had to heavily look at split shifting, right, where we split our elevators to only do certain floors, had export teams, import teams split, so that you just in case there was an incident or an issue with one of our teams, we could still do business continuation. So as a company, we spent a lot of time and resources looking at business contingency plans across initially China, and in particular, how do we get raw or core products into China for further manufacturing. And of course, what we started seeing very heavily there was delays in the way that governments, customs, etc., started moving. It's good to say, though, even during the early days, and particularly going through February, very little disruption was had. We started doing a lot of air charters, in particular to cover for either the lack of ocean or just to be able to get product in and out much quicker. And as we sort of moved further and further, what we just found is that certain government departments started slowing down their processes people started then looking at different modes to service or get in and out of China, not just China, but of course near Asia as well. So places like Korea, Japan, Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia. So, what was interesting then was that we really had to start looking at the way we did our traditional business. So where traditionally ocean freight moves were typically picked up by truck, moved to the port, moved out by ocean. We then started to, with certain restrictions on certain areas, start to look at rail modes as an example. Where there was capacity issues, for instance, in planes, we then started to have a look at rail services, trucking services intra-Asia, sea air services, sea rail services, barge rail, right? And so we started, there's kind of a mix of kind of products that you can kind of look at as standalone products, whether it be a barge service, but we really then had to be creative about how do we get and keep product moving whilst one avenue might stop for us. We had to find a way around that. So that was really the challenge through February and really most of March that kept us moving around Asia. What's then started to happen through the timeline, of course, is as Europe and other countries started shutting down or started to close down certain avenues, in particular planes, what we really then started to get into situations was in shipping lines, because of the lack of demand, it's really started cancelling vessels and cancelling services. And I just read something today. I think the 2M group has currently got about 21% less capacity this week because of cancellations. So in a normal circumstance, what would happen is, cancellation for ocean for product that still moves has to go by air, right? Normal circumstances, pretty okay. Where we are today, of course, there's a huge demand for air. So much of the cargo volume has shifted, mainly because approximately 60 to 70% of world cargo moves on passenger aircraft. Right? And most of the passenger aircrafts are the ones that have been affected by the virus. And so, we've again had to be creative with charters. But again, what we started to see is that the charter program, which normally would take 5 days to organize within China in particular, is now taking about 15 days, right? So we really have to start thinking a lot further ahead about when we organize charters. And of course, government agencies typically get priority on this. It's also meant that charters have become extremely expensive, often 4 to 5 times the normal rates. And so what we've also started to see is, whilst there's a reduction in capacity and a reduction in demand, we're also seeing people shifting back to ocean that would normally go air. Right? So, we've really just seen chaos. Right? I mean, everything turning on its head. And, if you think about the 15-day delays for charters, and then, the amount of time it sort of takes, quite often you could have lost 20 days before it's arriving in the port. So in some cases, ocean's seeing almost as a safe bet. Right? Rail services, we're still booking 2, 3, sometimes 4 weeks ahead because, again, everybody immediately thinks, well, if we can't move it by ocean, the next lowest cost option is probably a sea air service or it's a rail service. So again, we've introduced innovative services, for instance, rail from Japan through, going by ocean into China, and then China by rail continuously then through to Europe. But again, there's a backlog. So again, we have to be creative about it. Sea air isn't working quite so much because, again, the same issues with charters. We've really kind of gone full circle. But, what's interesting is, I guess, larger companies like ourselves and our competitors, we do have the suite of, rail, barge, trucking services that supply intra-Asia. And of course, the biggest, I think, change is that whilst a lot of this was set up, charters, etc., to serve intra-Asia models in the early days, now those charters and moves are becoming more global, which is also stretching out the supply chain and demand as well. So, again, it's been a huge challenge, I think, for everybody. And the good news is, I think, like most of the logistics industry, we've all kept working through this.
Yeah, very good. So then that's a bit of mode shifting, right? So like having to find these strategic new routes and shift the modes. But now there's a lot of warehouse congestion. So how are you guys dealing with the overcapacity and warehousing?
Sure. Well, that was something that actually started to be brought to our attention from customers sort of quite a few weeks back, and in particular where you've got a lot of retail stores, and let's take the FMCG or the supermarkets out of the equation.
Mhm.
But certainly when you look in the retail space, a lot of sportswear manufacturers and high street stores that normally rely on just-in-time deliveries and that final mile, large DCs moving into the stores. Of course, the stores are closed; nobody's placing orders.
Mhm.
And I did read a quote which basically said, "When people are in quarantine, they're not going to order new outfits." And it's not to take away from the retail space, but what that did sort of demonstrate is that these guys now have not only got stock, but because typically the average time from order to arriving in a DC can be upwards of 8 to 12 weeks. They've still got orders which have been on the water and are still arriving, going into DCs, and very little space. So one of the first things we started doing in Europe was, running around first of all to look at our DCs, seeing whether we could make additional capacity available within our DCs. And what was quite good in that exercise is, in an ordinary business, we get told we're full. But I think we've found about an additional 15,000 square meters just around the Netherlands and sort of Belgium, near Germany, which is good. It's going to help us, stage our customers' products. We're also looking at long-term storage as well for containers, which does impact in your business as well, because if we can't unload the containers anywhere, then that's an issue. Some innovative things that came actually from our team in Japan, which is a huge organization for us, was the advent of pop-up warehouses. And I'd never heard this term. It's something that's quite funky for pop-up stores in malls.
Mhm.
But again, the same situation was happening, in a place like Japan, where retail, warehousing space is at a premium. There are some sort of quite large empty spaces available, and what we sort of did was these huge marquee tents that allowed us to put in, sort of temporary storage at quite short notice. Normally, these type of things you normally see at, sports events where you see these big entertainment tents outside.
Right.
It's been repurposed for different usage. So, I think not just ourselves, but I think our whole industry is now coming up with new solutions, and I think we'll be coming up with similar solutions going forward. But yeah, it's kind of been very, very challenging. And I think we haven't seen the end of that curve just yet, because it's really, the lockdowns really only happened in the last 2 to 3 weeks in Europe, and of course we've still got probably possibly 3 to 4 weeks worth of stock still on the water. A lot of people have stopped manufacturing right now, which starts to leave us really into other challenges going forward, really, which is more long term.
And so, what do you think then the near future holds, and what challenges do you predict or suppose are going to happen?
Probably don't want to hear this, but I think it's still a period of chaos, as my first answer for most people. I think there's a couple of things that is really going to happen. I think the most important thing is communication between customers, 3PLs, or MVOCCs, or whoever you're sort of dealing with, and really that communication is very, very key to sort of help get us through this sort of situation and see what's available, see what solutions are there. Because I think today, this is not about us beating the competition or the competition beating us. This is about us all winning the industry as a whole, and ensuring continuation of the supply chain. But in terms of what do I think the future is going to hold? There was a sort of a web cast I saw the other day from a former CEO from DHL, Hans Tickler, and he reminded everybody about the bullwhip effect. And the bullwhip effect is, in very simple terms, whenever the supply chain stops, right? And, we see a lot of companies now stop manufacturing, stop placing orders, medical devices and supplies take priority. There's going to come a point where people start ordering again. And what's generally happens is when people start ordering, then, somebody says, I need 100 of these units. Now, the manufacturer says, well, let's make 200, demand's coming up. So they sort of say, okay, we'll place an order for 200. And, then the wholesalers, that is, or, the main regional offices, to make sure they've got buffer, because they'll also be replenishing buffer stocks. Manufacturers want to get ahead of the curve, so we'll produce more. And of course, what starts to happen is every stage that starts to happen, the ripples, if you imagine the bullwhip, it's like the old cowboy whip. it kind of starts to create these ripples through the supply chain that sometimes get bigger, smaller, but there's going to be aftershocks coming out at a later stage. And what's part of the advice that I saw on this, and I thought it was very sage advice, was that, we're all at the moment, we've just talked about what is our contingency? What are we doing to get ourselves through the next day, week, month? We also need to start looking about what are we going to do for the future? How are we going to plan? Let's hope that there's, starts to be recoveries and business back to normal, whether it's a month or 2 months ahead. But we really have to position ourselves well for that. And some of the advice it said is maybe as an organization, take 1 or 2 key people, right? And I know everybody's busy today trying to get through what we're doing, but try to get them to look at the future and really start to look at the forward planning for what happens when we get going again, because that's the critical time. Because, the supply chain is very much developed into almost just in time and demand based focusing. We really now have to get really cleverly into forecasting, talking with our logistics providers, talking with our customers, and really try to sort of plan this demand so that when these recovery shoots start to happen, we've got as much information to gear ourselves up for, the right product in the right place at the right time. Right? And I think in particular with what you guys do in terms of container repositioning, that's also going to be very critical to make sure that, it's all very well having the orders, but do we have the right containers in the right place? Can we move them? The premiums, and that will really help us try to manage the aftershocks really of this business.
So you're talking like full scale collaboration and data centric innovative solutions.
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about inventory. I mean, inventory is a dirty word or in a normal supply chain. But, how far people go into their buffer stocks or, almost depletion of their buffer stocks, we really have to get that supply chain moving when it's right. And different countries will be ahead of the curve. I mean, China's ramping up its manufacturing, but there's less of a demand right now because, again, from what we said earlier, people can't always cope apart from absolutely essential items like medical gear, foods, and stuff. But that's really going to be really key going forward. Data, is really important to sort of plan out exactly the forecasting. I mean, forecasting is also in our industry not the best, right? It helps with, forewarning, but whether we're dealing with, a 20% spike, 30% spike, 50% spike when things come online, or even greater, those are the challenges that really hit us in the supply chain, right? The sort of 5% ripples, 10% ripples most companies can cope with. But we're also, in a very unique situation where most carrier contracts, most airline contracts have been cancelled, under force majeure type situations. So that the tripartite sort of working really, customers, forwarders, shipping lines, airlines, it's going to be really, really key to ensure we get that continuity afterwards.
And just curious if you have any sort of speculation on when we will finally achieve like a more of a normalcy. Like, do you think that it's, because you mentioned a little bit earlier that it hasn't reached its peak yet, in Europe at least, and so when do you predict that we sort of get back to, dare I say, normal?
Without the crystal ball, there's an English expression which says "Jalemba," which basically means we don't know. People always ask us what's going to happen to the rates in the marketplace in 6 months' time, 9 months' time. I mean, I think this is really the point, is nobody really knows. As I say, China seems to be ahead of the curve, but they're also getting their second waves coming through. So whilst they, were able to contain Wuhan, one of the biggest challenges for most countries has been returning citizens. And that's been a big cause of new outbreaks and clusters. So, and that's now sort of going for other areas in China, like Shanghai, announcing sort of more clusters sort of arriving. So we don't know, but I think, the common sense, the quicker we all start to social distance, the quicker we start to follow the advice, the quicker we can kind of get going. I really wish I knew, because, if anybody knew, they could probably make a fortune. But It's a tough situation, but I think again that onward communication, we'll start to see certain countries operating or getting on top of the curve quicker. And of course, once those countries start to function normally, it starts to feed the rest of the world. But let's just hope, for everybody's sake, it's sometime soon. But yeah, I guess, yeah, who knows, 2 to 3 months at best.
Mm-hmm. All right, super.
I wish it was days.
Yeah, don't we all?
Yeah, I don't have that crystal ball, but we just see a lot of things happening. We absorb a lot of information and just try to make our best estimate from it, really.
Yeah, and I think that's you're right. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. I mean, even experts, the guesses are all over the board. Some say it's going to be years, even.
I think in terms of absolute business normality, yeah, I believe
Yes.
we're really looking at next year.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of, we can't, I was talking to some people over the weekend. I mean, some of the challenges that we're facing, actually, one of the things that I didn't mention was around shipping lines.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could throw this in later, but one of the challenges that they forced out was the huge amount of Filipino seamen on vessels.
Okay.
Right. So think about the workers on Maersk and all these guys. Most of these guys generally come from low cost countries, right? And the Philippines in particular has a huge network of independent sailors, okay, or maritime experts, and they essentially go on board ships for 3 months at a time, right? And they go 3 months on, 3 months off, 3 months on, 3 months off, and they return back to their home ports. Now, we're probably at this stage where a lot of these guys have done 3 months on, and they work 7 days a week for 3 months and go back and rest, and they get paid sort of quite well to do that. But one of the challenges is that the Philippines is in lockdown, so nobody's allowed in or out. So one, they can't go home. They're going to get to a point of fatigue, right? Because where are they allowed? There's a lot of countries that are not allowing people in, or they go into isolation or lockdown. So one of the challenges, I don't want to spread panic, but is how long can they keep working for in these environments, right? And we know it's a realistic, it's a proper situation, but there's going to come a point where they need replacing. So I know that some of the unions in the Philippines, the shipping unions, are talking to the government to try to allow returning citizens, but there's a complete lockdown on that, right? So no flights in, no flights out for passengers, right? Not all countries are quite as strict as that, but that does leave potential labor gap, right, or fatigue, which of course, when we start getting fatigue, accidents start to happen and things like that. So, if there's further less sailings and product is not getting through, of course, then we run into the risk of social disruption. With potential. I was reading something that they're quite worried about the middle class in Germany. Where people are very happy with their salaries and their job securities and their availability of goods. Now, when that starts to get threatened, right, and they start losing jobs and start to lose that security, there could be some form of, again, it's not just about Germany. Every other country probably has the same thing, where you just start to get people who start to panic, start to worry, and start to take the law into their own hands. So that's something, of course, nobody wants to see, and I guess every government's trying to work very hard to contain. But again, the knock-on effects from all these things are far and wide.
Yeah, and you do see different countries, like, I mean, the US is attempting to satisfy the population by handing out a $1,200 check to everybody, or just anything to keep the status quo, especially for the middle classes.
That's right, yeah. And again, that, goes really down. I mean, we've, the stimulus packages that have all been announced, I think for most countries, again, fantastic. Is it going to go to the right people? Let's hope. But, at the end of the day, if people don't have their food when they need it, it's, that's when they're just right. It doesn't matter if you've got a $1,200 check, but if you can't get your basics, or you can't get your health services or Medicare or whatever, then, all these things start to get affected. So, yeah, again, it's not about trying to spread panic, but that's where the bullwhip effect starts to happen. We all look at the here and now, and we really have to start thinking. That's why the isolation all of us doing our bit is so key, because we need to get this over with before it starts to break down.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I
Well,
really like how you've given us like the advice to look into the future, and that's actually something that we were aiming for when we had this idea to start like getting some insight from people in the industry. Is that we didn't want to say, okay, what is the coronavirus doing to you right now? Like we all know it's affecting all of us right
hmm
now in different ways.
yeah,
And you probably have similar problems as your peers do, but
hmm
we're trying to like really look towards the future, and anything that we can do on our part to help and get us all geared towards the future. I mean,
yeah. And that's important to say. That can't emphasize enough how everybody's trying to cope,
mhm,
and sometimes coping is not quite enough, and we still have to plan. We've done the business contingency plan very quickly for this situation, but I mean, even in our own company, I'm sort of having to sort of push that out and saying, right, what's our next steps now? So
mhm,
we're kind of getting used to this process, in a way. We get used to this chaos and things changing on the day, but how do we get back? How do we get used to being normal again?
mhm. Yeah.
Right? How do we, not quite normal, but we're going to go through these huge fluctuations and waves. But yeah, I mean, all of that's really key for us to at least spend some time and thought planning that out, and getting people on board with it.
I really appreciate you sharing that with us and being here today. So thank you, and yeah, wishing you the best of luck.
Thank you, Alexa, and please stay safe, and to all the viewers, also stay safe, and please follow the advice. Let's get this thing fixed and back to normal, if there's going to be a normal anytime soon.